Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, to see people I've met before and to get to know more of you. Let me begin. I want to do this. Okay. Does diversity lead to discovery and innovation? Does it enhance creativity? Science policymakers, including the European Commission, the US NSF, and the US National Institutes of Health, our big funding agencies, say yes. Indeed, data suggests that diversity leads to smarter, more creative teams that can open the door to new discoveries. But it's not simply diversity in and discovery and innovation out. Research demonstrates that diversity requires careful management. This includes, and you can see our wheels here, this includes non-hierarchical structures, engaging managers, utilizing team expertise, and especially what I want to talk with you today about, diversifying research methods, so that you can diversify knowledge outcomes. And I will focus here on the diversity of research methods for gender diversity. The operative question is, can we harness the creative power of sex and gender analysis for discovery? Does considering gender add a valuable dimension to research? Does it take research in new directions? First, a bit of background. Governments and universities, and increasingly corporations in the United States and Western Europe, have taken three strategic approaches to gender equality over the past several decades. The first I like to call fix the number of women. Here we had, I'm going to talk about our National Science Foundation. They're the big national funder, and they fund programs for universities. So I use them as my landmarks. So fix the number of women. Our NSF implemented programs focused on increasing women's participation in science and engineering already in the 1980s. So 40 years later, why haven't we fixed it yet? The second is fix the institutions. Here, our NSF implemented its advanced program in 2001 to promote gender equality in careers through structural change in research organizations. So the advanced program is very famous in the United States. They developed interventions, especially for unconscious gender bias in hiring and promotion. And they looked at things like life balance. So looking at all of the institutional policies that govern careers and trying to fix those for men and for women so that everybody's careers could flourish. The third fix is fix the knowledge or gendered innovation. Gendered innovation stimulates excellence in science and technology by integrating sex and gender analysis into research. NSF has no policies in this area, and this is my quest. So while it's useful to distinguish these three approaches for analytical purposes, they're deeply integrated. Importantly, efforts to increase women's participation will not succeed without integrating sex and gender analysis into the design of research, and at the same time, integrating gender analysis into research will not succeed without a full complement of men and women. So I ask you, where are the men today? Right? This is great, but it'd be better if we had half men as well. We really need everyone. Integrating sex and gender analysis into science and technology is not on the XX chromosome, right? XYs can also learn this. It's a learning process. It's part of the university education. And that's one of the things that we're really looking at. So, we have known for a long time that you need both the participation, so I call it bodies in the room, a good diversity of bodies in the room, and you also need the diversity of methodology, and I usually talk about sex and gender analysis. And we know that these two work together. We now have an empirical finding for that very soon, because I've read proof. Nature Human Behavior will highlight my postdoc's work, which analyzed 1.5 million articles in various medical journals. This is about medicine, from 1975 to 2015. And we found that if there's more diversity in the research team, you get more sex and gender analysis in medicine. And of course, in medicine, it's a matter of life and death if you analyze sex and gender differences, right? People are gonna die if you don't, so very important. So we know that if you have more women on the team, you get more of the sex and gender analysis, or vice versa. We can't see the directionality, but we know that the two are necessary. Gendered innovation was produced through a large international collaboration involving more than now 100 scientists, engineers, and gender experts. Earlier, we were funded by the European Commission, the National Science Foundation, and Stanford University. And this project has taken flight over the past 8 years. New policies have been implemented in the European Union, in Canada, in South Korea. There's an entire Center for Research on Sex and Gender Innovation in South Korea, and in the United States, especially at our National Institutes of Health. Gendered Innovations has expanded also into Silicon Valley, I'm happy to say. Stanford is only 20 minutes away from Google, and still, I have not had much impact on Google or Facebook, but last year, we started some tech roundtables for industry leaders, and we're now having a lively collaboration. Okay, let's dive in. Doing research wrong, I'm going to take you to our website. Doing research wrong costs lives and money. For example, 10 drugs were recently withdrawn from the US market because of life-threatening health effects, and 8 of those pose greater threats for women. Not only did these drugs cost billions of dollars to develop, but when they fail, they cause death and suffering. We can't afford to get the research wrong. Doing research right can save lives and money. An analysis of the U.S. Women's Health Initiative hormone therapy trial, which was a large government-funded trial done in the 1990s, found that for every dollar spent, $140 will return to the U.S. taxpayers in healthcare savings. The study also saved lives. There were 76,000 fewer cases of cardiovascular disease, 126,000 fewer breast cancers, 145 more quality-adjusted life years. And while most of the results were positive, the analysis did find 263,000 more osteoporotic fractures. Now, I really like these kind of metrics. So this hormone trial was the one that discovered that postmenopausal women should not take estrogen supplements, right? So it's a very important sex analysis that is done in medicine. And I like these kinds of metrics. I would like to work with some economists to find out, to find various metrics for engineering projects that don't include sex or gender analysis when designs of things fail. Like there's no seatbelt for pregnant women. That kills somewhere. It's hard to tell exactly, but it kills somewhere somewhere around 5,000 fetuses per year, even when the mother survives, because of the pressure placed on the uterus. So what are the metrics? What has that cost us in terms of human life and suffering? And it seems like an easy fix. I recently gave a talk to a room full of automobile researchers. They're all car designers. There were 100 men in the room, maybe 5 women. They never ever thought about it. They were very excited. A couple of companies rushed up to me and, maybe we'll get a seatbelt for pregnant women. But we need to have these kinds of metrics, these kinds of examples, so that we are motivated to get these things right. So it's crucially important to get the research right. And this is exactly what the Gendered Innovation Project tries to do. This project develops state-of-the-art methods of sex and gender analysis. I'm not going to discuss those so much with you today, but it also provides case studies or concrete examples of how gender analysis leads to discovery and innovation. And I'm going to give you 4 of those examples this morning. The first has to do with stem cell research. This is probably familiar to you now. The second was natural language processing, looking at big data and machine learning. The third example will look at civil engineering, looking at categories of data collection. We're always creating big data sets, and I want to see the categories. What information is being collected. And the fourth one looks at women's health and the environment. I'm going to talk about menstrual cups. So our first example comes from cells and tissues and looks specifically at stem cell therapies. Now let's go back to why 10 drugs were withdrawn from the US market. These days, as I said, developing a drug can cost billions of dollars. And there are many reasons why drugs fail, and fail more often for women. And one is that most research is done in males, whether in humans, animals, or cells and tissues. This study was done in 2011 by some of our colleagues at Berkeley. And it shows the sex of the animal used in basic research. So the little mice and the rats, are they male or are they female? And the blue here indicates that males are used more than females in all areas except reproduction, where you see the red bar, or immunology. That's toward the top. There's a predominance of red. But what I'm interested in here is the gray area. All of this outlined gray area where the sex of the animal was not recorded. This is research money wasted. You might as well throw the money out the window. If you don't know the sex of the animal, you don't have a key variable that is required to develop a useful drug. Drugs metabolize differently in men and women. This is now well documented, so we have to start at the very beginning of the research with the cells and tissues and with the animals and find out what the sex differences are. A similar study was done at Mayo Clinic on cells and tissues also in 2011, and here there's only gray area. It's white here, it's not even registered because nothing is registered. The sex of the cell is almost never reported, and again, this is money wasted. Now I'm going to go to our website, and I want to show you the information about the stem cells here. On my website, what can I do? I created it. Thank you. It's good. Okay. So here's our website. Everyone should be able to use it. We made it to run as fast in Silicon Valley as in rural India, is the theory. Anyway, it's supposed to work really well. And you see here that we have our methods, which I'm not going to talk about, but here are our case studies or examples in buckets of science, health and medicine, engineering, and environment. So I'm going to talk about stem cells now, when the sex of the cell is not recorded, but why you need to record the sex of the cell. And here it is. In each instance, we give an abstract. If you just read 28 abstracts, you get a lot of information. And then the press was bugging me all the time, so I did a journalistic version. You can learn a lot just from the journalistic version, but here's the scientific version. And in every instance, there are only 2,500 words. We had a whole bunch of focus groups to find out how people read, because I'm a historian, and I'm making this for natural scientists, engineers, health researchers. How do those people read? And I learned that engineers don't read. They like process charts. I mean, you know, and I don't have, when we get to the engineering, I don't have enough process charts yet because I don't really know how to make them, and you know, so, but we collaborate. So anyway, we tried very hard to make this a humanist. If you want humanists and natural scientists to work together, you have to meet in the middle. And I'm trying to meet them. They're trying, it's very interesting, they're trying to meet us. The companies in Silicon Valley now know that they need to understand, they need humanists to understand culture. They discovered culture. So this is a very exciting moment to be alive for a humanist. I've been invited at Stanford to be a founding member with about 25 other senior professors of a human-centered AI institute, artificial intelligence institute. So right from the beginning, they're bringing in the social scientists, the humanists, the computer scientists, and the lawyers. I mean, you know, it's really interesting. So anyway, back to stem cells. Okay, so here's our website. And why might the sex of the cell be relevant in stem cell research? Researchers show that there are sex differences in the therapeutic capacity of the stem cell. So here you see the XX is more active. It has greater therapeutic capacity than the XY stem cells. So there's a difference, and you would want to choose which you need. This slide shows stem cells taken from muscle tissue and simply indicates that the female cells are more regenerative or active than the male cells. Yet very few researchers consider the sex of the cell, and this can lead to failed research. An international team from Norway and Australia worked with stem cells in mice, and they appropriately used male and female animals. So using both animals is excellent research design, but they used only female stem cells. And this was an unconscious and arbitrary decision. It means that in the discovery phase, they did not see anything unique to the male stem cells, nor did they detect important differences in the function between male and female cells. The result of not considering the sex of the stem cell was that their male mice died, and they didn't know why. They thought maybe a postdoc had made a mistake in the experiment. So whenever in doubt, blame your postdoc. Then eventually, through a gendered innovations workshop in Norway, the team realized that they should also consider the sex of the stem cell. Then they found that sex matching of the donor and recipient yielded the best results. So they found that this combination, male to male and female to female, yielded the best results. But of course you have to look at all the combinations. You have to do the experiment before you know. Now, in the case of stem cells, in the case of any research, we also need to look at intersectionality. We know about male and female differences, or men and women differences, but we have to look at intersectionality. We have a whole method for that called factors intersecting with sex and gender, and I don't want to go into that right now. But for stem cells, the other factors that might be important are hormonal, immunological, and environmental. So we must always look at these factors intersecting with sex and gender. For humans, it's like ethnicity and socioeconomic background and religion, all of these things. But even for stem cells, there are important environmental conditions that you need to look at as well. Now let me interject here. Sex matching, which may be important for stem cell work, may also be important in human organ transplant. So I hope you don't need a heart transplant. But if you do, you better know the best science for that transplant. So for heart transplant, sex matching yields the best 15-year results. This is also true for kidney transplant, but not for lung transplant. So again, you have to look at the specific science for each organ. So, and we can't make any assumptions. All possibilities need to be examined. But for heart transplant, there's also a gender issue, not just a sex issue, but a gender issue. In the US, in any case, women donate more organs. So if you're a man and having a heart transplant, and the surgeon knows that sex matching yields the best outcome because of this gender difference in society, the surgeon may not be able to follow the best science. So we have, it's just really interesting, we have both a sex issue and a gender issue. Okay, now I'm going to shift to my second example. I'm going to shift to technology. I'll talk about computer science and specific natural language processing and focus on machine translation. So I start with a story. A couple of years ago, maybe I should go to my case study. So here we start with the engineering lens, machine translation. All right. So a couple of years ago, I was in Madrid and interviewed by some Spanish newspapers. I don't read Spanish, I'm sorry to say. So when I returned home, I put the articles through Google Translate to see what they said about me. And I was shocked that I was repeatedly referred to as he. Londa Schiebinger, he said, he wrote, occasionally it thought. Google Translate has a masculine default. I mean, seriously. How can such a cool company as Google make such a fundamental error? Now I have to say, you need to know that Google supports gender equality like crazy, right? You work for Google, they do your laundry, they give you food. I mean, they basically are the housewife and do everything so that everybody can work easily. There's daycare, I mean, there's everything. So how can they make such a fundamental error? Google Translate defaults to the masculine pronoun because he said is more commonly found on the World Wide Web than she said. And we can see that right here. So this is Ngram, which is also a Google product. Humanists, you should use Ngram. It's really cool what you can do with it. And of course, we can't live a moment of our life without using a Google product. So this shows you the ratio of he said to she said, and it's been 4:1. It peaked at 4:1 in 1968, and then dropped dramatically to 2:1, where we are about now. And as you know, I mean, what else happened between 1968 and today? The women's movement, right? This was the period when NSF and lots of public organizations are funding for gender equality. There's a whole cultural revolution going on, and with one algorithm, Google wiped out 40 years of change in the English language. I mean, everybody, not our current president, but most presidents, use he and she. Television announcers use he and she. There's been a change in the English language. So, Google wiped out 40 years of revolution, but they didn't mean to. It's completely unconscious gender bias. So we called Google up and said, hey Google. So the fix, a couple of years ago, the Gendered Innovations Project held a workshop where we invited natural language processing experts, some from Stanford and some from Google. They listened for about 20 minutes, they got it, and they said, we can fix that. And you know that it was a cool problem because during the workshop they were emailing under the table to their lab saying, cool problem, cool problem. So fixing is great, but constantly retrofitting for women is not the best road forward. I had to ask myself, how was it that the Google engineers, many of whom are educated at Stanford, made such a simple mistake? What are we at Stanford doing wrong? Well, for one thing, we don't teach gender analysis in our core engineering courses. Students can come to the humanities, to the social sciences, and take a lot of gender courses, but we don't teach gender where they live. So we need to fix that. We have several initiatives at Stanford now to incorporate gender analysis right into the core engineering courses. This is absolutely crucial. And I have now, I think we have a way that we can do it in one of the very largest courses that educates 550 Stanford students per year. And we want to incorporate the gender in a way that it just seems business as usual. So it's in a huge computer science course, and the students will debug the program, and they'll also debias the program. So debias from a social point of view. And it will just be, okay, you debug, you debias, that's what you do if you're a computer scientist. So we want it to seem just really part of the science. So again, some products can be fixed, but what if Google, Apple, and other companies started product development research by incorporating gender analysis? What innovative new technologies, software, and systems could be conceived? The point I want to make here is a very serious one, and that is that this unconscious gender bias from the past amplifies gender inequality in the future. When trained on historical data, as Google Translate is, the system inherits bias, including gender bias. And it turns out that even though Google wanted to fix the problem, they haven't been able to yet. And one of the labs at Stanford worked on the problem for a year before giving up. It's always harder to fix something if you've already set the basic platform. So importantly, Google Translate is creating the future. Technology, that is to say our devices, programs, and processes shape human attitudes, behaviors, and culture. In other words, past bias is perpetuated into the future even when governments, universities, and companies themselves have implemented policies to foster equality. So the big question here is, how can humans intervene in automated processes to create the society we want? Second question, who are those people going to be? Whose values are going, if this process isn't automated, everybody thinks if it's automated, it's completely neutral and it's fair, but we now know it's not. So if we're going to intervene, how do we make those decisions? I think that's very complicated. So there are many examples like the Google Translate example, and we're holding a workshop. Oh, I put this slide in the wrong place. Maybe I can't do it here. Oh well, I'll just come back to it. There are many examples like this Google Translate example. And let me go over it and come to this. So here's another automated system. In the US, we have so many people who come to our courts, who go through our legal system. I mean, that's a problem and we should fix that. But anyway, software that is used in US courts, so these are the automated systems to say whether or not a person should get out on bail or whether they need to be jailed immediately because they're a risk to the community. So the software used by US courts was twice as likely to flag black as opposed to white defendants as being at a higher risk for committing future crimes. So a Google Translate-like problem. Next example, Google Search. Here's another automated system. Men are 5 times more likely than women to be offered ads for high-paying executive jobs. The machine correctly understands that women are paid less. And therefore, we probably don't want ads for jobs that are over $200,000 in the United States. So it returns, the machine working on all of the bias in the data returns the jobs more often to men than to women because it understands that that's what it's supposed to do. And it gets a higher score by doing that. Now, here's the problem of amplification. It's not just that the machine returns to you what it finds in the data set, but by iterations, it amplifies that bias. And here, these are all brand new papers, as you can see there. This is like 2017, it just came out. So this algorithm looks at images on the internet, and they chose cooking images. Okay, cooking images, someone cooking. Some random picture of someone cooking is over 33 times more likely to involve a female. Okay, that makes sense. But once the trained model keeps working on this, it shows the cooking image, it shows it 68% of the time. So it takes a human bias and it amplifies it into the future. So we really don't want that sort of thing to be happening. Now, at the same time, there are many solutions, and we are having a workshop at Stanford in March, bringing together computer scientists and lawyers and gender experts to look at the solutions, to map the solutions. I was at a workshop at Harvard just in November 2016, and Cynthia Dwork is a leader in this. She calls it defining fairness. She wants algorithms to support human fairness and not our unconscious bias. There's a similar initiative at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm very excited about this solution of hard debiasing. And the title of the paper is Man is to Computer Programmer as Woman is to Homemaker. Then they want to debias these word embeddings. So you'll be happy to know that words on the web live in vector space, and they're all in association. And that's how machines understand human language. So this is natural language processing. So these authors were able to map the words in vector space. They were able to hard debias or take out the sexist associations while leaving the rest of the words in their proper association. I find that just kind of really exciting. And then, after I read this paper, I emailed the authors saying, cool paper, and they said, oh, one of our team has just accepted a job at Stanford. So I emailed that guy, and the moment he hit the ground, we decided to start working together, and we're having this workshop in March. So very exciting times. And now I want to, so that's it for natural language processing. I now want to go to big data and categories of data collection, and to do that, I'm going to look at our case study on public transport. And that's in our group of environment, because good transportation helps the environment. And I'm going to look at this here. Okay. So, this is about big data, and it's not about the historical bias embedded in the data, but it's about the bias in the way data is collected. So I'm going to look at categories of data collection. And to give this some flesh, I want to look at our case study on public transportation. Urban planners collect data to understand how people use trains, subways, and the bus system. So I drove across Mexico City this morning for about an hour. You got a lot of buses. How do they define bus routes? And here the gendered innovation is to reconceptualize how data are collected and analyzed. So traditionally, civil engineers collect data in 8 trip categories, and these are the traditional trip categories. This data is from Spain, I think it's specifically Madrid, 2006 to 2007. And the biggest reason that people travel in most societies is for employment. The reason they use public transportation systems. The second most common reason they travel, according to the way this data is collected, is for education. Then there's shopping, there's leisure. I have no idea what you Spanish do when you're strolling. There's escorting. This is like taking elderly to the doctor, that sort of thing, or children, visiting, and others. So if you are traveling only for employment, you have a specific travel pattern. You travel from home to work and back again. So this way of collecting data does not look at caring work. Caring work has not been prioritized as a category of data collection. If you take caring work out of all of these categories where it's hidden right now and make it a category of its own, it becomes the second largest reason why people use public transportation. Employment is still the largest. Now, if you travel for employment and caring work, you have a particular travel pattern. You go from home to the daycare, to work, probably to the grocery store, maybe to the dry cleaner. You better go back to the daycare, and you go home again. These are called change trips, but they aren't just boom, boom, boom. It's a different kind of pattern. So, you know, the innovation here is understanding this idea of the mobility of care, as my Spanish colleague so nicely calls it, as a category of analysis. This is something new and exciting, and if we incorporate the concept of the mobility of care, we can have more efficient transportation systems, reducing costs, and enhancing the quality of life for more people. Okay, now I come to my final example, which is not yet on the website. It's something we're working on now, and that is menstrual cups. How many people here, how many women here use menstrual cups?
My daughters.
Oh, your daughters. And how many people have ever heard of menstrual cups? Oh, okay. Well, that's exciting. It shows you I really am very old. Because this is not up yet, I'm really happy for feedback on this one, because we're just kind of starting. So I'm going to start with this story here. A couple of years ago, I read in the New York Times that women in rural India have no menstrual sanitary products. They don't have tampons or sanitary pads. They tend to use rags. It's what I think women in the 19th century used. We didn't, you know, what did women in the 18th century use? We've always menstruated, what did we use, right? No one, historians don't talk about that. So when I do this in my classes, and I used to, this year I'll do the menstrual cup, but I used to do the history of tampons, and you have to walk into the room and say, tampons, 3 times very loudly, because the students are like shrinking in their seats, and you know, nobody talks about these things. Why is that? It's just a human. Okay. So the solution I presented to my undergraduates when I learned that women in rural India had no menstrual sanitary products was that the Gates Foundation, we always think the Gates Foundation should do everything, that the Gates Foundation should take a B-52 military transport plane and drop them from the sky. Well, one of my students, an economics major, had a much better idea. For her final paper, she highlighted a company that had invented a low-cost machine. This guy invented a low-cost machine by which a group of women in a community can manufacture pads and sell them at a low cost to other women in the community. So this scheme had two social goods. It provided menstrual hygiene products to women who didn't have any before, and it provided jobs for women in communities in rural India. But sanitary products worldwide are an environmental burden. In 2011, women in India, for example, generated 432 million soiled pads per month, weighing 9,000 tons and covering a landfill area of over 24 hectares. Now I need to point out, we don't have figures for the US, it must be even more, of course. I need to point out that in 2011, only 12% of women in India had access to sanitary pads. So this waste will only increase hugely as women gain full access to sanitary products. So when the other 88% come online, it's what's going to happen to the environment. So of course, this is a global problem. Shockingly, in the US, the Center for Marine Conservation collects over 170,000 tampon applicators alone along the US coast every year. So this is stuff just floating in the water. So the solution, I think, could be the gendered innovation here, I would say, is menstrual cups. I recommend that India and other countries that don't have sanitary products, like much of sub-Saharan Africa, leapfrog over or skip over traditional sanitary products and instead adopt menstrual cups, because this is what I'm working with, so tell me why I'm wrong, because I think they're more sustainable in cost to the women. Tampons are incredibly expensive, and it seems like just a great business model by companies to make something that women have to replace every month, right? For many days every month. So I think that menstrual cups are a great solution to the cost to women and to the cost in the environment. This is not a scientific illustration, but it's just, so you can see, you have pads and tampons per year, and you should actually make it to scale. And then you have these little tiny menstrual cups. So a number of recent projects have studied introducing menstrual cups to school-age girls in South Africa, Uganda, Kenya, and rural India. The girls were provided with a cup, with education about menstruation, because, my mother never told me there was something called, it was like, surprise, and education about cup use. And the girls need to be given a bar of soap every month, and they need some source of clean water and also a pan of some sort to disinfect the cup. So studies show that with proper education and training, girls successfully use the cup in these communities and often prefer them to pads. So menstrual cups are made from medical grade silicone or natural latex. One drawback is that they don't biodegrade themselves. They need to kind of be collected and disposed of as medical waste. Menstrual cups can be left in place for up to 12 hours. They can last for about 10 years. A woman then, if they last for 10 years, would really only need about 4 over a lifetime. Now, I suppose women will collect them in all colors and styles, but you only need so many. And menstrual cups can be multifunctional. I think this is also very exciting. They can deliver woman-controlled contraception in some places, sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. No one else in the family would necessarily need to know that she's using contraception. They can also deliver microbicides and might protect women against STIs and HIV. Now, I'm not sure all of this has been studied carefully, but this is some of the promises. Now, I hasten to add that menstrual cups can't be used by women, such as women from some parts of sub-Saharan Africa who have been sewn closed. That's part of some cultures, so they would not have an opportunity. And this, of course, includes about 200 million girls and women worldwide. So the cost of menstrual hygiene products is prohibitive in many areas, and several companies have programs to donate to women in need, such as homeless women in the United States, for example, or women in developing countries. I don't know if you have here these Tom's shoes, where if you buy a pair, they donate a pair. So a lot of these menstrual cup companies are doing that. You buy a cup and they're donating a cup, which I think sounds like a really nice scheme. Okay, so in the discussion period, you can tell me every reason I'm wrong on that. I really would like to hear your thoughts. Now I'm going to conclude with some policy issues. Policy is one driver of innovation and can help encourage scientists and engineers integrate gender analysis into their research. So interlocking policies need to address granting agencies, hiring committees, editors of peer-reviewed journals, industry leaders, and educators. So I've also made this part of the Gendered Innovations website. We have a cool timeline that starts in the 60s and shows every important policy for gender in science and technology that came online. And I'm first going to take you here. These are granting agencies' policies on gender, women in gender and science. So one is fix the numbers. Do they have a policy for that? Well, yes, everybody does. Fix the institutions, almost everybody does. And then I'm interested, fix the knowledge. Do they have a policy on that? And if so, what is it? So I've loaded up the policies. Do you all in Mexico, your National Science Foundation? Okay, I will add it. I will add it. Okay, so how many of you, in fact, evaluate grants for granting agencies here in the room? Yeah, we got, okay, got some people who do that. So granting agencies can ask applicants to explain how sex and gender analysis is relevant to their proposed research. And of course, to my mind, the global leader in this is the European Commission. They have had a policy, they started trying to put policies in place in 2003, 2001, I think. And in their last funding program, which is $80 billion, and goes across their, is it 27 or 28 states, goes across all the European states, they have asked that all researchers integrate sex and gender analysis in the design of their research where relevant. Now they've just done this has been going for 2 years, this most recent, and they've just done an analysis, and not that many people are integrating sex and gender analysis into the research because they don't know how, and the evaluators don't know how to evaluate it. So have you solved those problems? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So this is all very important. And if you are, they had a very nice advice paper here, which you can just click into and get, which I think is helpful in how this happens. But as I said, they just in September, just last month, they released this evaluation. And they're doing very well on, they have a 3-pronged gender equality policy in all of their funding schemes. They're doing very well on gender in the research team, well-mixed teams. They're doing very well on leadership. So women in the decision-making process, that's great, but they're not doing so well on the integrating sex and gender into the research. So more work is needed there. I should say that in the US, our NSF, so if I go down to our NSF, we have a big fat no there. We don't do anything and for that. And NIH just put, our Institutes of Health just put in a policy that came online in January that everyone needs to look, anyone receiving public funding has to look at sex as a biological variable in their research. And that seems to be going well. They do not do gender in medical research. We at Stanford are creating an instrument, a quantitative instrument to understand gender that could be used in clinical trials. Very complicated. I think if we're successful, they will then ask for gender in clinical trials, so in human research. Okay, so secondly, the second part of policy is how many of you review for peer-reviewed journals? All right, very good. Now, you can ask that sophisticated sex and gender analysis is in that paper before you say it's excellent for publication. And a number of journals now have made that part of their policy so the editors have made this part of their policy. And I'm most excited, we wrote a paper for Lancet, and I'm very excited that the Lancet adopted this policy in December 2016, and at the same time, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors also adopted these guidelines. It's just kind of 5 simple guidelines. And this has mostly to do with sex in medical research. Now I have to say, of all of these journals here, we don't have any engineering journals that do this. So that's my project, my mission in life now, is to get the engineers to figure this out too. These are almost, as you look down these, they're almost all medical journals, where it's really important. But for engineering, it's important as well. Okay. Then we also need to, I don't have these other policies loaded up, but we need to integrate sex and gender analysis into the curriculum, as I was talking about the engineering curriculum before. The Stanford Medical School does not integrate sex and gender knowledge into the curriculum. I'm thinking of getting people together to bring a lawsuit. It is a matter of life and death. I do value my Stanford job, so I may not do that. But nonetheless, it's really important. We have the place that has been successful integrating sex and gender knowledge into the medical curriculum is Berlin. The Charité there, Vera Brigitte-Sagrosik has gotten that through. And we have a national group that works on this, but I don't know of many medical schools that have done it here in the US. So medicine, engineering, any of the life sciences, of course we already do this in social science and humanities. And then we come to industry. Products and systems that incorporate the smartest aspects of gender can open new markets. Products that meet the needs of complex and diverse user groups enhance global competitiveness and sustainability. And if we have time, I'll just make my conclusion, but if we have time, I have a cool little video I'd like to show. Are we good? Okay. Okay. So, well, let me show the video. Now, we made this video because, well, yeah, you don't want to do this one? I mean, it's right here. We made this video because startups in Silicon Valley have almost no women in them, and the young men have no knowledge of gender issues. So we made it for them. So you will see it is made for them. That is our demographic, right? Young men in Silicon Valley. So the English is a little, colloquial.
So, you're growing your business and making the world a better place. Well, that's just great. But hold on a second. What if you were overlooking up to half of your potential customers? Don't be too hard on yourself. Even the most beautiful unicorns do this. Consider Pinterest, whose valuation rose from $200 million in 2011 to $11 billion in 2015. Surely such a magical steed must have maximized its opportunities. Nope. Only 29% of Pinterest users were men in 2014. Anyone who has spent time on the site will not be surprised to learn that its search algorithms tended to favor traditionally feminine sensibilities. Only recently has Pinterest awakened to the vast pin potential of more gender-neutral engineering. Pinterest's growth is now being propelled in large part by recognition that men's needs and preferences can be different from women's. Gendered innovation is opening the way for something bigger, something better. More often, missed opportunities go the other way. When Apple released its health app, HealthKit, in 2014, it buzzed with all kinds of attractive metrics, recording blood pressure, daily steps and calories, blood alcohol content, of course, body fat percentage, respiratory rate, even mineral consumption.
But it left out women's menstrual cycles. Apple missed half of its potential market share right out of the gate. Apple corrected this problem and updated the app a year later, but what was the cost in terms of profit, poor publicity, and team morale?
What if your company is designing a biometric wearable to detect early signs of heart disease? Great idea. But recognizing that men and women have different patterns of heart disease will make the product work for everyone, and potentially save more lives, you digital hero, you.
Or let's consider gaming. EA Sports only recently decided to include women's soccer players and teams in its blockbuster FIFA 16. Soccer is among the most popular women's sports globally, with more than 1.5 million female players in the U.S. alone. By appealing to women, EA Sports has massively expanded its customer base, just like that.
What about hardware safety? Take automobiles, for example. All this talk about self-driving cars, and we can't even get the damn seatbelt right. Conventional seatbelts don't fit pregnant women properly, and motor vehicle crashes are a leading cause of fetal death. Gendered innovations have led to the development of pregnant crash test dummies that enhance safety in automobile design, finally keeping us all, even the smallest among us, safe.
Bottom line, products that incorporate the smartest aspects of gender and meet the needs of diverse user groups can open new markets and enhance global competitiveness.
This is low-hanging fruit. And to learn more about how innovators have already begun capitalizing, visit our website's list of case studies.
Okay, backstory on that. The voice, the video was made by my graduate student. He's a historian of science. And the female voice was his fiancée, who is now his wife. Anyway, so just to conclude, there's much to be done. Researchers need to learn sophisticated methods of sex and gender analysis. Universities need to incorporate these methods into their curricula. Corporations need to integrate these insights into product design. But eyes have been opened, and we cannot return to a world that ignores gender. Innovation is what makes the world tick, and as I hope I've begun to show, gendered innovation sparks creativity by offering new perspectives, posing new questions, and opening new areas to research. Can we afford to ignore such opportunities?